welcome to the Kitchen Conversations podcast. My name is Patrycja Rozwora and I'm the host of this platform where we speak about contemporary art from so-called Eastern Europe. In each episode, you're going to be introduced to one artist or researcher whose visual or activist practice sheds light onto the complex former socialist region with all its histories, cultures, languages, foods, but also traumas and their inevitable contemporary consequences. This podcast is a fully independent platform existing since May 2020, meaning it is not a funded project and it is self-run by me, myself, and I. If you enjoy the monthly conversations, please consider supporting the podcast by making a single donation on buymeacoffee.com/kitchenconversations or becoming my monthly Patreon via the Patreon website. All the needed links can be found in the show notes of this episode. Welcome to another Kitchen Conversations. Since Christmas is coming, I was actually thinking about a Christmas episode for you, yet this conversation won't be too uplifting in terms of topics and subjects discussed. However, I do have a small gift for you. All of the films that we will discuss today on the podcast are available to watch online, and you will find all the links in the show notes. It's not often the case that the art we are speaking about on the podcast can immediately be viewed by you, so I'm very, very excited that it is the case today. And trust me, the films are worth seeing. My today's guest, Vladimir Kozlov, is a writer and underground filmmaker, originally from Belarus, who lived in Russia for the past 22 years. Both his writing and cinematographic works explore the themes of contemporary Russian and Belarusian society and the historical moments that shaped their totalitarian systemic monsters. This podcast is the first of 3-episode collaboration I'm doing with the Belarusian Filmmakers Network, of which Vladimir is an active member, and we'll tell you more about. Enjoy the listen and don't forget to watch the films. So welcome, Vladimir, to Kitchen Conversations podcast. Happy to have you here through my screen online.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Where are you now located?
I am currently in Stuttgart, Germany.
And how long do you already live there?
I've been there for just over 1 year.
It's like a car city, right? Like all the big car companies are based there.
Mercedes and Porsche. Yeah, the German Detroit.
Exactly. Yeah. I think the air is also like connected to that. Very happy that Leonid Kalitenia connected us. This is a series of 3 podcast episodes with Belarusian filmmakers. And it is connected to the Belarusian Filmmakers Network that you are a co-creator or co-runner. So perhaps we could start there. You could, introduce the network and then also your involvement in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to talk about that. So we launched the Belarusian Filmmakers Network almost 3 years ago. It's not a hierarchical structure. It's not a labor union. It's like an initiative which aims to help Belarusian filmmakers, especially in the current situation when a lot of them have left Belarus and are basically scattered around the world, at least around Europe. And those independent filmmakers who stayed in Belarus, they also need quite a lot of support. We are trying to create sort of an alternative film industry, an alternative to the official Belarusian film industry, which is sponsored by the Belarusian government and is heavily censored. Of course, filmmakers associated with us want to do nothing with that. And as soon as we came up with the idea for the Belarusian Filmmakers Network, I suggested a project. I said that in this situation, it's almost impossible for young Belarusian filmmakers to get a chance to make their first feature film. They could wait for years. There are actually several generations of Belarusian filmmakers who are still waiting for their chance of making their debut feature. And I have this background in very low budget, basically micro budget / no budget filmmaking. So I suggested, why not we try to encourage young Belarusian filmmakers to make their first feature on a very, very small budget. And we call this project the Micro Budget Incubator. We launched it last year, and 2 winners of the first season, they are currently they are basically finishing their first features. Both films are in post-production, and I hope they will be premiered next year. There has been quite a lot of festival interest in one of these products, and I hope that the other would also do well on the international festival circuit. And currently, even it's quite an interesting coincidence, today is a deadline for us, for the board members of the Belarusian Filmmakers Network to choose the 2 winning projects of the second season. And we'll have to do it like by tonight.
So busy day for you. Thanks for still meeting me here.
No. It's actually I've made my choice already. So
Nice.
It's not something that I should be too concerned about. I made my choice.
All right, perfect. I wanted to use the chance to understand a bit more about the micro budget or no budget cinema. And I know you've been also yourself involved in that as a filmmaker. Can you tell, for someone who doesn't know anything about it, what's the difference between, let's say, the other type of cinema, which exists as well?
Yeah, with pleasure. Actually, it's something quite interesting, and it's something that most people don't know. Because when we talk about cinema, about the film industry, most people think that it's something about big budgets, about millions or tens of millions of dollars. But in fact, over the last 10 years, maybe 10 to 15 years, we've seen this technological revolution. Now, to make a film, even a feature film, even a feature-length film or a feature-length documentary, you no longer need a lot of money. You basically have your camera and your sound and your smartphone. Of course, this is an extreme case, but there are digital cameras that are available, and you can technically make a film with almost no budget that a regular person would never be able to tell that it's a no budget film. You are doing the same thing, just with very little money. When I'm often asked, how much do you need to actually make an no budget film? And my answer is, it starts from close to zero. Because if you have a friend who is a cameraman and who has their own camera equipment, and if you have another friend who is a sound man and has their own sound equipment. And if you are passionate enough about your idea, if you can motivate people to take part in your project for free, you can technically make a film almost for free. Just one caveat. You still need to spend some money on transportation, because it's not good if your actors have to pay for their transportation to the set, and you should spend some money on organizing catering. Basically, your actors and crew shouldn't be starving on the set. So that's that was the case with my first film, with my first feature film, Desiatka, number 10, which I made more than 10 years ago. It was the early days of these technical achievements, and the cameras we were using were not that good, and the sound equipment we were using wasn't that good, but still we were able to make a film basically for nothing. I only spent not just me and my co-producer, we only spent some money on transport and on some food on the set. That was it. We didn't spend any single ruble, because we were making the film in Russia. And that was pretty impressive. We spent like 5,000 rubles, which at the time was maybe $170, and that was it.
Yeah, that's really, for a film, it's really close to zero, as you said.
Of course, it's very hard. It's not like it's a cakewalk. You just go and make a film. No. You have to put a lot of effort in it. But the main idea is that if you don't have a chance to make a film in the film industry, you can go ahead and make it just independently. And there is one other important thing. If you're making this kind of low-budget, micro-budget, no-budget film, if you are funding it by yourself, if there is no producer who tells you what to do, you are enjoying an unprecedented level of freedom. I mean, creative freedom. Of course, there is no financial freedom. You have these financial constraints. But in terms of creative freedom, it's just you could do whatever you want. There is no censorship. There is no dictation from the part of the producer. No one tells you what to do, and that's also something that I enjoy quite a lot.
As a filmmaker yourself, if you had a chance, would you actually like to be in the other industry, or like in the industry which has actually millions to make big productions? Or once you decide you are in the no budget, low budget, micro budget pocket, you would prefer to stay because of, for example, the creative freedom you have?
I don't consider filmmaking as a career. It's just something that I'm doing. I consider myself basically, and I technically am, an underground filmmaker, which means that I'm making a living by doing something else, and I find time to make my films. And I'm not that young. Why would I go to this industry? Why would I try to do something to get accepted by this industry? It's not what interests me at this point, frankly. Of course, more than 10 years ago, when I was just starting, I was talking to the industry. There were some conversations, but they led nowhere, because I didn't really. There was a lack of interest. From both sides. I wasn't that interested in doing it on those conditions that were offered, and they were not that interested in working with me.
Moving towards your career and what you do in your life, you're an underground filmmaker, but you're also a writer. Could you talk about how those two combine and how you kind of came from one to the other?
frankly, I never actually wanted to be a filmmaker. I was always interested in writing, in literature, and I was writing. I was lucky enough. I didn't have to struggle to put out my first book. I wrote a book that consisted of a novella and several short stories. It was called Gopniki in Russian. It's kind of hard to translate. My preferred translation is hoodlums. Yeah,
all right.
Although there are probably other options. So, and
I think people who listen to the podcast know what's
I hope
Gopniks.
so. Yeah. I hope that's, yeah. So, and I just sent it, it was more than 20 years ago. I just sent it to a couple of publishers. It wasn't typical Russian fiction. It was quite graphic. It had a lot of profanity. And in Russian culture, it's still something foreign. It's still something that's not exactly accepted. So I only choose two publishers because already in Russia at the time, in the early 2000s, there were like a lot of publishers, but I understood that it only made sense to send this manuscript to a couple of them, and I got a reply from one of the two, and they put out my first book. I've written several more books since then. I've worked with all kinds of publishers, from big publishers to very small underground publishers. And at some point, I got interested in film. As a fan, as a viewer, I've been interested in film since my childhood, since I was 10 years old. It was still the Soviet Union. We didn't have a video at home. We were only able to watch films at cinemas or on television, and I was just consuming everything I could get, cartoons, documentaries, feature films, series. Then at some point, I didn't completely lost interest. But when I was a teenager, I had some other interests, of course. But then I again got interested, and as a viewer, I watched films, a lot of films, and then. Thanks to my writing, I was once invited to work on a script of a feature film in Russia. I didn't quite like that experience because it was in the industry and I didn't really like the process, but I kind of like the atmosphere, the very idea of making films, and I thought that probably I could also try to make a film as a director. I had some ideas, but I wasn't able to do anything about it. And then this technological revolution occurred. I was able to start making these no-budget, totally outside the film industry. And that was in line with my attitudes, because to some extent I come from the punk background. I used to play punk rock at a certain point in my life, and I share these aesthetical and ideological ideas about punk rock and punk music in general. Like you don't have to be technically proficient if you have something to say. Like you should always have your own ideas. You should always have your own opinion. You shouldn't listen to anyone. There are no hierarchies. There are no authorities. So yeah, I kind of like that. And it's this ethos of independent, no-budget, micro-budget filmmaking was kind of in line with this punk thing. I was happy to kind of embrace it. It was like, I thought, well, it's kind of my thing. speaking about this interrelation between literature and filmmaking, in literature, I've always liked minimalism. I don't like when there is too much reflection, when there is too much intellectualization, when there are too long descriptions. I prefer minimalism. I don't mind. If someone's interested in other types of literature, that's totally okay with me. I'm just doing my thing. When I started making films, I realized that I could push this even further to the limits and write prose that's kind of similar to a screenplay. And that was kind of an influence of filmmaking on my writing. These days, I am more focused on storytelling because in my early books, I wasn't really concerned about storytelling, probably because those books were set in circumstances that were interesting by themselves, and I didn't have to be focused on the story. But now, these days, when I try to write something new, I'm trying to think about it in terms of a story, in terms of a character, in terms of characters, yeah, to some extent. So there has been an influence of filmmaking on my writing here.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited to speak about your films. I had a chance to watch 3 of your films, more recent ones. I watched the film As We Wish from 2019, Three Comrades from 2020, and your newest, I think, feature Summer 1989. Would be nice to devote a bit of the podcast to each of the films. And the exciting thing is that the 2 first films are actually available for everyone to watch on YouTube. I think it's super cool that people can listen to the conversation and then watch your films. I really, really enjoyed them, although they really scared me as well. And definitely unsettling realities that you're showing there. Let's start with the film As We Wish.
Because of this no budget, micro budget filmmaking model, all my films, except for the most recent one, are set in present time. And of course, I am sort of inspired by the reality in which I live. And of course, I try to respond to what is going on around me. And this film, you translated it as we wish. My translation is slightly different. Whatever we want, как мы захотим in Russian. It's kind of a reaction to living in a society that was sick. Russian society of the time was already sick. I'm not at all proud or happy about it. But I started to notice it quite long ago. Later, when Russia invaded Ukraine, and when the majority of Russians actually supported or tolerated this invasion, that was, to me, that was another proof that the Russian society, contemporary Russian society, is sick. But I noticed some elements of that quite earlier, and I wanted to make this film about basically 2 young characters who actually find themselves in really tough circumstances. They, without divulging the plot, I could say that they get in trouble with rogue police officers. And to me, these rogue police officers, they kind of symbolize the attitude of Russian authorities to regular people. This arrogance, this feeling of being in power, of having power over regular people. And I wanted to make this film as a statement, sort of as my observations about the Russian society of the time. And unfortunately, it hasn't changed for the best. It's just changed for the worse. And this is a story about young characters who don't care much about politics, about other things, and then suddenly, just by accident, they are being squeezed by this machine which symbolizes the entire government, the repressive Russian government. Although, again, they have nothing to do with politics, it's just a regular situation.
And perhaps here it's interesting for the listeners of the podcast to also hear your story of where you lived, where you were born, where you actually worked as a writer, as a filmmaker, because that's, I think, very much influences this film and any other work.
I was born in Belarus when it was still the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic, and I spent the first 20 years of my life in the Soviet Union. Then it collapsed, and I lived in independent Belarus of the 1990s, which was also quite an interesting time. It was chaotic. It was sometimes very difficult, but still it was a very free time. Then, in 1994, Alexander Lukashenko became Belarus's president, and Belarus began to gradually slide back to Soviet practices, and I realized I no longer wanted to stay there, and I moved to Russia, which at the time was still a free country. It was, compared with Belarus, it was a totally free country, and I moved to Russia in 2000. By accident, it was the same year Vladimir Putin was elected Russia's president, and I basically observed the same unpleasant things that I had observed in Belarus just a few years ago. The country moving towards authoritarianism, towards dictatorship, the country becoming less and less free. And I actually lived in Russia for more than 20 years. I lived in Moscow, and I traveled to Russia's other parts a lot, and I observed the life of ordinary Russians, which outside Moscow and St. Petersburg was quite different from what it was in these two big cities. And as I already said, this Russian reality of the authoritarian rule certainly influenced what I was writing, and to probably even a bigger extent what I was doing in film.
You premiered the film in 2019, so before the full-scale invasion, before the revolution in Belarus, of course, already after the, for example, annexation of Crimea. So, I mean, Russia already showed to the outside world that they have some plans, although not everyone wanted to see it. But still, when you see the film, you kind of feel like in the past. I'm based in Berlin for like 3 years. So at the beginning, I watched a lot of historic films about East Germany, about the Stasis, how they kind of decide their own rules, how corrupt the system is, how the authorities basically, allow themselves to do their work the way they kind of think is good for the sake of national identity. But this is, as you said, it's the reality of today. 2019, is that
sure I understand what you were saying. Like all repressive systems are similar. It's banal, it's ridiculous, but they are really similar to each other. the system of Stasi in the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, on the system of KGB in the Soviet Union, and the system of police and FSB in contemporary Russia, they are ridiculously similar to each other. They are based on probably the same principles, like whoever has the power is right. And this is why they are so similar. And I totally understand your associations between this film and films about Eastern Germany when it was a part of this socialist bloc. Yeah, it's absolutely similar. When you look at contemporary Belarus, I didn't want to make this film political. But of course, after what happened in Belarus in 2020, when a lot of regular people came in touch with the state machine and were basically squeezed by that machine, they were not political either. They were just regular people who wanted a little bit more freedom. They wanted to have a little bit more choice. And I can really draw sort of a parallel between this film and what was happening in Belarus in 2020 and 2021, when a lot of people were thrown into jail, were tortured, and a lot of people had to just to leave the country. They were just regular people who just wanted to have a regular life, who wanted to have a little bit more freedom. They wanted to have a little bit more choice in their life.
This film was focused more on the state machine, the system of contemporary Russia. Your other film that I had the chance to watch, Three Comrades, I would say focused more on the development of that sick society, of like what that system reproduces and produces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tell us more about this film and your thoughts behind it.
As you rightly noticed, this is a further exploration of this idea of sick society in contemporary Russia. And I took three regular characters, three guys in their mid-20s, who are on the outside. They are very regular people. They work in an office. They probably have college degrees. They are seemingly normal people. But then at some point they show their true nature, true violent, sexist, xenophobic nature. And I wanted to show these characters as kind of typical characters in contemporary Russia. I've met quite a lot of characters like that who could behave normally in normal circumstances, but when they, for instance, just get drunk and they feed off each other's aggression and each other violent attitudes, they basically turn into monsters. They do horrible things. Unfortunately, there are quite lots of people like that. These are Russian guys, but probably looking around, looking at what's going on in other countries, to some extent, maybe it's more than just a sick society in Russia. It's probably also about some dark sides of human nature in general. And of course, it depends upon in which country, in which society you live. If you live in a healthy or relatively healthy society, maybe these dark sides of those people's nature could never really manifest themselves. But in contemporary Russia, it's a very fertile ground for these people and for them to show their true nature. Without really giving any spoilers, this film is set in St. Petersburg, another major Russian city. The entire action takes place in the course of 24 hours. So it's basically 24 hours from the life of these people. Quite eventful 24 hours, I should say.
Very much. And very dark. What fascinated me of how you make films, that those are, as you said, like as we talked at the beginning, stories of individual characters, but like quite quickly you understand that it's not only their individual stories, but it really shows like a system or like a bigger symbol of something they represent. And I guess the most scary thing is that they are so young and, you know, they have access to all the same informations we have. Let's say we saying people outside of living in Russia. Yeah, they do live in a kind of parallel reality. And that's always quite dreadful. But for you lived in Russia till the beginning of the full-scale invasion, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So both of those films were made while you lived in Russia. I wonder, did you actually show it to the public? In what circumstances are you able to show such works in Russia?
Yes, I was able to. I was never part of Russia's mainstream film industry. These films didn't attract that much attention from the part of censors. Whatever we want was actually shown at 2 official Russian festivals. Back then, in 2019, it was still possible to show such a film. I remember talking to one of those festivals, to the programming director. She was kind of scared, but she also wanted something that would represent contemporary Russia, and I noticed how conflicted she was. She wanted this film, and she was also scared, but that it could cause some problems for the festival. But eventually, they screened that film. That's a festival in Vyborg in northwestern Russia, one of Russia's best-known film festivals. The reaction was very mixed. There were people who were just slamming this film. They were saying, "Well, you are showing something that doesn't exist. You are showing Russia that doesn't exist." And with the other film, with the Three Comrades, I was able to get like a premiere screening in Moscow, but I wasn't able to get it into any Russian festival. It was the political climate was already changing, and it was already harder to get it screened at any official Russian festival, because all official Russian festivals are in some way or other sponsored by the government. And of course, today it wouldn't be possible at all, because of this censorship that was introduced after the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Because of lack of time, I have to go towards your third film that I would like to speak about. But yeah, on your YouTube channel, you also answer questions and speak about your other films. And most of the times you can put like subtitles. So if people are more interested about hearing other aspects of those two films, they can definitely go do that. But your most recent, if I understood, film, Summer 1989, I would say compared to the two other films that I saw, a more calmer, more relaxing type of experience, but definitely also deeply speaking about something that's perhaps coming. So here we're looking at the end of the 80s, set in Belarus, at a campsite, a group of young people enjoying their last summer before going into the adult life, let's say. Is some of those characters, those storylines autobiographical?
Yes, to a large extent, it's a very personal film. And after these two films, which we've just discussed, I wanted to make something different. I wanted to make something probably that's not that hard, that doesn't deal with this harsh reality of contemporary Russia. I wanted to make a film about my own teenage years to some extent. The characters in this film are of the same age as me. Like in 1989, I was 17, and they are 17 too. As they go camping. But of course, it's not just an idyllic story about young people having fun, although that's the case too. I wanted to look at them from the present time because we already know what happened later. The country in which they lived collapsed. They had some hopes, they had some dreams, and then they found themselves in a totally different reality. This is why it was interesting for me to have a look at it, to look 30 years back and try to think why Russia and Belarus turned out to be the way they are now. Because, as I said, it's a very personal film. I remember being a teenager in perestroika times when the country, the Soviet Union, was like gradually opening up, becoming a more free country where things that had not been available previously, they were now being available in terms of new music, new films, new literature. And we had a lot of hopes. We really had a lot of hopes. And again, it probably depends upon a specific person, but I really wanted to live in a free country. I really hoped that now that the communism was going to collapse, we would have some brighter future. Now, looking back at those years, it's like clear how naive we were. But we couldn't imagine. We could never imagine a regime like Lukashenko's regime in Belarus. And we could never imagine a regime like Putin's regime in Russia. It was totally impossible. It was totally unimaginable. And now, to a great extent, we came back to those Soviet times, and it's actually even worse. I remember well those Soviet times, and that regime was much softer compared with Putin's regime or Lukashenko's regime. This film, I wanted it to kind of operate on two levels. The first level is just a story, sort of a coming-of-age story about young people, and the other level is about looking back at their hopes and dreams and kind of reflecting about what happened with the country and why we are in a situation in which we are now, and what could have probably been done to make it turn out differently. There are no answers. There are just questions. There are kind of ideas for reflection, ideas for thinking.
Do you blame your generation or the generation of your parents or the one that came after? Could there be something done better within our Eastern European countries?
We are certainly responsible. We are responsible to some extent. Of course, older generations, they are more responsible. These older generations were really poisoned by communism, by these communist years. And that poison has never come out of them. I think that the roots of what's happening in contemporary Belarus and contemporary Russia are to a large extent in that Soviet past. People were unable to move on, to leave all that communist burden behind. And these communist attitudes, this Cold War mentality, turned out to be too deeply entrenched in people, unfortunately. But as I'm saying, our generation, which was a younger generation, is also responsible. Because in the 1990s, we were too focused on the new opportunities that were opening up. We were focused on having fun. We were naive. We were sure that the Soviet era was never going to come back. We were so sure it was left behind, and then we were focused on ourselves, on our lives, and we didn't have a bigger picture, unfortunately. So my generation is also to blame for what's happening, and of course I've been thinking about it a lot, and yes, absolutely we are to blame too.
And lastly, if you can tell a few sentences about your current life, how do you see your practice developing quite away from the context you've been based in the last 20 years?
Yeah, it's kind of hard. The Russian invasion of Ukraine 2.5 years ago came as a real shock to me, and the decision to leave Russia, where I had lived for 22 years, was a hard decision. And in terms of my creative work, it's kind of hard. I still haven't made a film since I left. I'm still in transition. I'm trying to figure out what kind of film I would want to make and what kind of film I could make in these circumstances. Because I'm not really part of this society in Germany. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to live in this country, which is a free country. But in terms of making films, I don't know. For the last 2.5 years, I've focused on writing. I've written a book which is sort of experimental for me. It's kind of a mix of prose and elements of graphic novel. It came out just a couple of months ago, and now I'm considering my next novel in which I will look back at Belarus of the late 1990s, the years shortly after Alexander Lukashenko became Belarus's president. It's going to be some kind of an autofiction, as it is called. So like a mix of real events and something that I'm just imagining. So of course it's kind of hard. As I'm saying, I'm still in terms of creative work, I'm still in transition. And I'm glad that I have this opportunity to work in the Belarusian Filmmakers Network to try to help younger filmmakers to make their first features. To some extent, it kind of replaces making films by myself.
Yeah, that's a nice coming back to where we started. Well, for the very, very ending, As a tradition already on the podcast, I wanted to finalize by speaking about your favorite food from home. And I think since you're away from home, I think it might be also nice to think of it for a few minutes. What are you making, or what do you think about when you're nostalgic about home?
I'm not really original in that. My favorite Belarusian food is draniki, potato pancakes. They are also present in other cuisines, like in the Polish cuisine, as far as I know, in the Jewish cuisine. Yeah, but it's also Belarusian, and for me, it's kind of a culinary connection between me and Belarus. Something that I enjoy, and something that is also reminiscent of my childhood when my mother made those draniki, and it's a nice, pleasant memory.
Thank you so much. This dish appeared already quite some times on this podcast, but it's always nice to remember about it. And I also, as you said, it's also present in the Polish cuisine, so I also do it from time to time. It's a lot of rasping of potatoes, but then it's very easy to make once you're done with the potato part. So thanks so much, Vladimir, for this conversation, for being so honest and open for all my questions.
Cool. Thank you for having me. It was a really interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thanks. And this was it for today. Thank you for reaching till the end of this episode. The next one is coming in 4 weeks, always on Monday. Please follow the podcast and leave a rating. I'm also happy to hear your feedback, so feel free to write me via Instagram or by email. All the needed info you will find in the show notes of this episode. In the meantime, take good care, and we hear each other soon.